So now we have created a user, we have created assets, created directories, and we have created accounts. What to do with them now? Because in the current moment, if you maybe log in as somebody like myself or like the user we have created, and you want to try to do some kind of password management or maybe some kind of session management, what does happen? If you go to the home button and say new request, there's nothing, because you don't have defined something that gives you the right to use a password request or a session. It says the definition of what you're allowed to do is simply missing. And this is called an entitlement in Safeguard. So if you go to our settings menu, you see entitlements here. And if you click on entitlements, not surprisingly, there's nothing defined here. So if you want to make Safeguard work, you first have to define an entitlement after you have created accounts and assets. Same approach as usual. If you want to have something new, just click on the plus sign and define your entitlement. So maybe you now have to think about a proper naming schema or something you want to name it, because maybe depending on the name you can spot with a glimpse of your eye what this entitlement is for. In our example, we skip this hard brain work, so we just give it a name entitlement 1. There's a priority here. You can select different values for it. Leave it as 1. It will be automatically adjusted if you add more and more entitlements. We're going to talk about this priority stuff later. Next one you can adjust is time restrictions. So if you want to use these entitlements on a specific part of the day or in the night, you can adjust these time restrictions to your needs. So maybe you have entitlements for the normal working days, maybe you have it for out of office days, and so on and so on. All this depends on the security policy you want to implement. So again, spend a little time on it to work that out first, and then if it's all laid out, come back and start configuring the Safeguard machine. We just leave it as it is, because so it is no time restriction at all, and just click on add entitlement. So that's our first entitlement. Nothing big to see. We have no users, we have no accounts, and we have no assets. So an entitlement in this case can be understood something like a big container or something like a big box or something like glue that pulls all the stuff together. So the first thing you want to define is which users of Safeguard are allowed or are assigned to that entitlement. So the first stuff you usually do is click on users and then click on plus to get a list of all the users that are already defined in Safeguard. And if you, for instance, want to have Aaron Vance and myself to be allowed to use that entitlement or assigned to that entitlement, then just select the users here and click on OK. They will be listed here, and you see Aaron Vance is a directory-based user, and myself, I'm just a local man. The next one you see here in this headline is access request policy, and this is where the magic starts. The access request policy defines how the access is controlled, who is allowed, how the workflow in Safeguard is defined, and it consists on various settings we're going to go through. Click on plus to create a new access request policy and just give it a name. We just name it access request policy 1. Oh yeah, it's an example. It's a priority 2. And the important thing on the first dialog box here is the access type. You can have it as a password release, that means that it's password management only, or you can have it RDP or SSH, this is session management. And RDP and SSH are currently only the protocols that are supported by Safeguard for session management. You even can give that policy some kind of expiry, because maybe you want to set up the policy to be expiring on whatever end of next week, when people who are using that request policy are no longer working with it. So you can have some kind of housekeeping, find it here, but we're going to leave it unselected. We just say, okay, this should be something like for password release. Click on next to define the scope. And the scope is about the accounts. In this box, you define the accounts that you want to tie into that access request policy and into that entitlement to be managed by this definition. So in our case, we just add an account. There are lots of them already defined here. Let's start to play around with our Linux-based Safeguard 1 account we have created earlier. And you see, you have it here defined as a password request and a session request. You could change this later if you want, just leave it as it is. And the next one here is the requester. And the requester is something that is presented later for somebody who is requesting access to that account. And if you see here reasons is something you can define in the settings menu, most upper menu of the application configuration, so that somebody who may have to approve this request has a chance to see what this request is basically for. We just leave all these free here, so that the requester can tick one of these. Of course, you should then say, if you have a reason, require a reason to be selected. If you don't want a reason, just leave it here. So in this case, this would be optional. In this case, the user or the requester has to select one of these reasons. If you want the requester to have some comments to be entered, tick the next box, require comment. So there will be a comment field displayed, so something has to be entered there as well. All this is optional and can be skipped if not required. Next stuff is about a ticket number. Ticket number is a reference to something that's called a trouble ticketing system. I think we're going to talk about this one later when we talk about how to integrate change management or change ticketing systems into Safeguard. Duration of access, that is the default time period. The access request will be valid if approved. So it is 2 days, hours, and minutes. Maybe you want to have it 1 hour as a default. If you want to have the requester give the requester the possibility to extend this when requesting access, you can tick that box and adjust the values to your needs. We just leave it here untagged. And next stuff we can here define is something that is called an approver. So Safeguard has an internal workflow that allows you to define an approver. So somebody else has to give you approval if you're trying to get access to an account. So in this case, if you want to access that Linux system with the account Safeguard 1, there may be an application owner or system owner that must give you approval before you can have access to that system with that account. You can have multiple approvers, you can have lots of approvers. So if you maybe, for instance, say, I want to have 3 approvers of a list of all these 3 users, this is pretty bad. Then this will show like that. If you just give it a 2, it will say, if you just have 2 approvals of all of these 3, then the request will be approved in total. We just say it will be auto-approved. Maybe we're going to talk about approvals and all the policies we can define later. The next one is the reviewer. The reviewer is an additional process that can be defined so that somebody else has to review your access request once it has finished. We just leave it not required. And the next stuff we're going to have to define is the access configuration. Is about if we have to change the password after checking it in. So that means if the duration of the request overdue, or if you have instructed the system to do a check-in, then we're going to configure here, in this case, Safeguard to change the password automatically. So in this case, after you have finished your work or the duration time is exceeded, Safeguard will change the password automatically to a new value, so that you have to do a new request to use the account again, because you will not know the password anymore. If you want to have simultaneous access, that means that the password can check out during a request window to multiple users, then you can select this checkbox here and adjust the value to your needs. We just leave it unchecked, so that means one account can be used by one user, just one time only. We don't have session settings here because it's not a session request, it was a password change request. And again, you could define time restrictions for this access request policy as well. We just leave it untagged, so that's okay. Emergency is something that you can bypass approvals just by enabling emergency access. It will trigger a notification that you will get access to an account without approvals. If you enable this feature, we just leave it here unselected. By clicking on Create Access Policy, we're going to create our access policy in Safeguard. We now have our access request policy, and we have our users assigned to that entitlement. And in general, you're going to see now we have 2 users, we have 1 account to be used on 1 asset. So now we have created all our accounts, assets, and our entitlements and all that kind of stuff. So let's see what we have done. So if we go back to our main menu and we click on our new request button, we're now going to see the server or the asset we have created in our request here. As you remember, before we did anything in entitlements or in our access request policy, it was all empty. Now we have a valid access request policy, so we can raise this request against our asset. Click on Next. And now we're going to see the account we have defined in that access request policy. Click on Next. And protocol now here that is displayed is pretty empty. It just has, this will be a password release because this is not a session request as we have defined. and the session and the password request does not have a protocol. If you click on next, you're going to see our details, so we can have the request immediately. That can be changed. If you unselect it here, you can just propose a date or in the future when this request should become valid. Usually this is used when you are doing requests that have an approval workflow inside, and maybe you want to have some request during some kind of maintenance window, maybe on the weekend or out of office hours or whatever. Then you may have to request this access for some time in the future that all the approvers have enough time to approve your request. So you can just fire it up, and so all the people required here have enough time to answer this. In our demo, we just do it immediately, and we can select a reason. Maybe it's a standard change, and we can enter a command, and we're going to submit the request. And as you see here, the request now is listed here in the request window. You're going to see we have a request to the asset IMS S10 with the account safeguard1, and it's available, so that it means you can now start using it. Click on that little triangle, so it folds up a little bit more. And now it tells you you have 59 minutes left to use it as a password request, and the password can be shown if you click on the show password link. And that's our initial password we have used. And this will close after that when this time goes down to 0. You could use now this here as a copy and paste, and then whatever, take this password and get a connection to that system. If you click on the check-in button, this will tell the system you are ready and you do not longer require access to that password. So if you do a new request to the same password again, and again, it is internally managed. It's available. And if you click on show password, now the password has changed. So in the meantime, when you check it in, after checking in the password, Safeguard has gone to that system and changed the password of that account, so that it is now no longer known unless you have the proper request.